Stepdad demanded I pay rent at 16 to teach me responsibility while his bio kids got allowances, so I moved in with my dad, and now years later he wants me to help with his retirement home bills. BC they wouldn't. I was stacking dishes in the industrial washer at Rosie's Diner when my phone buzzed. The number looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it until I heard her voice. Melissa? It's Karen. Your mother asked me to call. Karen. Mom's best friend from book club. The woman who used to slip me $20 bills at Christmas and tell me I deserved better. My stomach dropped. Is Mom okay? She's fine, honey. But she wanted me to reach out about Richard. He's in a bit of a situation. Richard. My stepfather. The man I hadn't spoken to in 16 years. What kind of situation? I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. Well, he's had some health issues, and the assisted living facility costs are adding up. Your mother thinks maybe you could help contribute something monthly. She knows you're doing well now. I actually laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine bark of disbelief that made my coworker Danny look over from the grill. Karen, I need to get back to work. Tell Mom I'll call her tonight. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking as I shoved my phone back into my apron pocket. 11 years, and somehow I was still the solution to Richard's problems. Let me back up. My parents divorced when I was 7. Dad moved 3 hours away for work, and I stayed with Mom because switching schools seemed cruel at the time. She met Richard when I was 9, married him when I was 10, and by 11, I had 2 stepbrothers, Connor, who was 8, and Tyler, who was 6. They were Richard's sons from his first marriage. The first few years weren't terrible. Richard was distant but not unkind. He worked in pharmaceutical sales and made good money. We moved to a bigger house. Mom seemed happy. I saw Dad every other weekend and half the summers, and while I missed him constantly, I tried to make the best of things. Everything changed when I turned 14. Mom got pregnant. She miscarried at 12 weeks, and something fundamental shifted in Richard after that. The loss seemed to awaken a fierce protectiveness in him, but only toward his biological children. It was as if losing the potential third child made him cling harder to the 2 he already had, while I became a painful reminder that our blended family wasn't the perfect unit he'd imagined. He became obsessed with Connor and Tyler in a way that felt almost desperate. Every accomplishment was celebrated with expensive gifts. Every setback was cushioned with comfort and excuses. They were his legacy, his do-over, his proof that he could raise sons properly. I became invisible. Connor got a new gaming console for his birthday. Tyler got a bicycle that cost more than my entire wardrobe. When I asked Mom if I could take art classes at the community center, she said we needed to be more careful with money right now. 2 weeks later, Connor got signed up for travel hockey at $300 a month. But I could have lived with a favoritism. Lots of stepkids deal with that. What broke me happened the week after my 16th birthday. I came home from school to find Richard waiting at the kitchen table with a printed spreadsheet. Mom stood behind him, wringing her hands. Sit down, Melissa, he said. The spreadsheet detailed my living expenses. Rent, $400 monthly. Utilities, $50. Food, $150. He'd calculated that I cost the household $600 per month, and since I was 16 now, old enough to work, it was time I learned about financial responsibility. You want me to pay rent? I stared at the numbers, sure this was some kind of joke. It's not about the money, Richard said, in that condescending tone he'd perfected. It's about teaching you real-world skills. When you turn 18, you'll know how to budget. You'll understand what things cost. Connor and Tyler don't pay rent. Connor and Tyler are children. I'm 16. Exactly. Old enough to contribute. I looked at Mom, pleading silently for her to intervene. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Your stepfather thinks this is a good learning opportunity, she said quietly. Do they contribute? I pointed toward the living room, where Connor and Tyler were playing video games on the massive TV Richard had bought them for Christmas. They do chores, Richard said. I do chores. They're younger. You're practically an adult. He pushed the spreadsheet toward me. I expect the first payment by the end of the month. That gives you 2 weeks to find employment. I got a job at Rosie's Diner the next day. The owner, Rosie herself, was a chain-smoking woman in her 60s who hired me on the spot when I told her I needed work desperately. She started me at minimum wage washing dishes and bussing tables, eventually letting me waitress Friday and Saturday nights. The first month was brutal. I'd wake up at 6 for school, sit through 7 hours of classes, then head straight to the diner for a 5-hour shift. By the time I got home at 10, I'd eat whatever leftovers were available, do homework until midnight, and collapse into bed. Weekends were worse because I worked doubles, 8-hour shifts that left my feet aching and my back screaming. My first paycheck was $340 after taxes for 2 weeks of work. I immediately understood the math didn't work. At roughly $680 per month, I'd barely cover the $600 rent Richard demanded, leaving almost nothing for the penalties when I inevitably came up short. I told Richard the first needed to pick up more hours or find additional income. Good, he said. Problem solving. That's exactly what I'm trying to teach you. I started babysitting for neighbors on weeknights and Sunday afternoons. Mrs. Chen down the street paid me $12 an hour to watch her twin toddlers. The Hoffmans paid $10 an hour for their 3 kids. Between the diner and babysitting, I was pulling in about $900 to $950 a month. After Richard's $600 rent, I had maybe $300 to $350 for everything else: gas, school supplies, food at school, any clothes I needed. It still wasn't enough most months. Rosie noticed I was struggling. One particularly rough Friday, after I dropped 3 plates because my hands were shaking from exhaustion, she pulled me into her office. "Kid, what's really going on? Why's a 16-year-old working herself to death?" I broke down and told her everything. About Richard's spreadsheet, about Connor and Tyler's allowances, about Mom's silence. She listened without interrupting, smoking her menthol cigarettes and nodding occasionally. "That's horseshit," she said finally. "Complete horseshit. But I'll tell you what I told my daughter when her ex tried to bleed her dry: document everything. Keep records. One day, this is gonna matter." I didn't understand what she meant then, but I started keeping a journal anyway. I wrote down every payment to Richard, every penalty, every time Connor or Tyler got something expensive while I was told we couldn't afford basics for me. I logged my work hours, my grades, everything. The journal became a record of the imbalance, proof that I wasn't crazy or ungrateful like Richard sometimes implied. I worked 25 hours a week around my school schedule. Every paycheck went straight to Richard, who marked my payments on a ledger he kept in his home office. If I was late, he charged me a $20 penalty. If I was short, he'd take something of mine as collateral. He once kept my laptop for 3 weeks because I'd spent part of my rent money on new shoes after mine fell apart. My grades started slipping. Not dramatically, but enough that my teachers noticed. Mrs. Patterson, my English teacher, asked me to stay after class one day in November. "Melissa, you've always been one of my strongest students. These past 2 months, you've been falling asleep in class and your essays lack your usual insight. Is everything all right at home?" I wanted to tell her. I wanted to explain that I was working 25 hours a week to pay rent to my stepfather while his kids played video games. But what would that accomplish? A call to my mother? A confrontation that would make everything worse? "I'm fine," I lied. "Just not sleeping well." She didn't believe me, but she let it go. She did start giving me extensions on assignments though, which helped more than she probably realized. The worst part wasn't the exhaustion or the money. It was watching Connor and Tyler live the life I should have had. Connor joined the travel hockey team and suddenly the house revolved around his tournament schedule. Mom would drive 3 hours to watch him play, packing elaborate snacks and cheering from the stands. Tyler started taking piano lessons with an expensive instructor, and Richard would sit in the living room beaming with pride during practice sessions. Meanwhile, I missed my school's art show because I had to work. I couldn't join the debate team because practices conflicted with my shifts. When my history teacher nominated me for a regional academic competition, I had to decline because the event was on a Saturday and I couldn't afford to lose the wages. Richard framed it as teaching me priorities. In the real world, you can't do everything you want. You have to make choices. But Connor didn't have to choose between hockey and academics. Tyler didn't have to sacrifice anything for his piano lessons. Only I was learning about sacrifice, about choices, about priorities. The holidays that year were particularly painful. Mom asked what I wanted for Christmas, and I said I could really use a new winter coat since mine was falling apart. Christmas morning, I opened a $50 Visa gift card. Connor unwrapped a PlayStation 5. Tyler got a new bicycle and a professional art set. "The gift card is for your coat," Mom explained. "So you can pick one out yourself." A decent winter coat cost at least $100. The gift card wouldn't cover it. I ended up using the money for rent and wore my falling apart coat through winter, layering hoodies underneath. January brought a new torment. Richard called a house meeting to discuss his expectations for the new year. Connor and Tyler sat on the couch looking bored while I stood in the doorway, still in my work uniform. "I've been reviewing the household finances," Richard began, "and I think we need to make some adjustments. Melissa, your rent is increasing to $700 per month starting February." "What? Why?" "Utilities have gone up and food costs more. It's only fair that you cover your actual expenses." "That's almost all my money. Even with babysitting, I'd be left with maybe $200 to $250 for everything else." "Then you'll need to work more hours or find a better paying job. Welcome to adulthood." Connor and Tyler's allowances didn't decrease. If anything, Tyler's went up to $40 a week because he'd made honor roll once. I had honor roll every semester and got rent increases. I picked up extra shifts wherever I could. Rosie let me work in the kitchen during weekday afternoons, doing food prep and cleaning. I started babysitting for neighbors on the weekends I wasn't at the diner. Every dollar I made went into Richard's ledger, and still I came up short most months. The penalties piled up. $20 for being 3 days late with February's payment. Another $20 for being $50 short in March. Richard started keeping a running tab of what I owed him, complete with interest calculations. My breaking point should have come earlier, but I kept thinking things would get better. Mom would see reason. Richard would ease up. Something would change. It didn't. Meanwhile, Connor got a $50 weekly allowance for keeping his room clean. Tyler got $30 for being respectful. They literally got paid to exist while I worked myself ragged to sleep in a bedroom I was apparently renting. The breaking point came during spring break of my junior year. I'd picked up extra shifts to save money for the junior prom dress I wanted. I'd seen it in the window of a consignment shop, deep blue, exactly my size, $75. I'd been dreaming about it for weeks. I came home after a double shift to find Connor wearing $200 sneakers. "Early birthday present," Mom explained, seeing my face. "His birthday is in 4 months. He's been doing really well in school." Connor had a 2.8 GPA. I had a 3.9 and worked 25 hours a week. I'd gotten straight A's on my last report card, and Richard had barely glanced at it before reminding me that my rent was due in 3 days. I went to my room and called Dad. We talked every Sunday, but this couldn't wait. "Come live with me," he said immediately. "Dad, your place is 3 hours away. So transfer schools for senior year. Melissa, what he's doing isn't okay. You know that, right?" I did know. I'd known for a while. But leaving felt like admitting defeat, like letting Richard win. "Think about it," Dad said. "Really think about it. You don't owe them anything, sweetheart. Especially not $600 a month." I thought about it for exactly 3 days. Then I packed everything I owned into trash bags and called Dad to come get me. Mom cried. Richard stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, looking vindicated, like I'd just proven every bad thing he'd ever thought about me. "This is exactly your problem," he said. "When things get tough, you run away. You're never going to make it in the real world with that attitude." "The real world doesn't charge children rent while giving their brothers allowances," I shot back. "You're not my child. You're barely even your mother's priority anymore." Mom gasped. "Richard." But he wasn't wrong, and we both knew it. She'd made her choice the second she let him present that spreadsheet. "Melissa, please don't do this," Mom begged. "We can figure something out." I already figured it out. I shouldered my backpack. "I'll come back for my furniture next weekend. If you walk out that door, don't expect us to take you back," Richard warned. "I wouldn't dream of it." Dad pulled up 20 minutes later. We loaded my stuff in silence, and I didn't look back as we drove away. Senior year at my new school was strange but liberating. Dad's apartment was small, but I had my own room, and he never once asked me for rent. He gave me gas money for my beat-up Honda and made sure I had lunch money. When I mentioned wanting to apply to colleges, he sat down with me and helped me research scholarships. The transition wasn't seamless. I'd left behind the few friends I had, abandoned all my extracurriculars, and joined a school where everyone already had their established groups. The first few weeks were lonely. I ate lunch in the library and kept my head down in classes. But gradually, something unexpected happened. Without the constant weight of work and Richard's demands, I started remembering who I was before everything fell apart. I joined the school newspaper. I auditioned for the spring play and got a small role. My grades shot back up to straight A's. Dad noticed the change. "You're smiling again," he said one night over dinner. I forgot what that looked like. His apartment was in a complex full of other divorced parents and their kids. I became friends with a girl named Ashley who lived 2 doors down. She was also navigating the complicated world of split households, and we bonded over our shared experiences. Through her, I met other kids, started going to movies and football games, began building something that resembled a normal teenage life. I still worked at Rosie's during the summers when I went back to visit Dad, but now the money was mine. I saved most of it, spending small amounts on things I'd never been able to afford before: books, art supplies, clothes that actually fit. The first time I bought something purely because I wanted it, not because I needed it, I cried in the dressing room. Mom called occasionally, but our conversations were strained. She'd ask about school, I'd give one-word answers. She'd mention Connor's hockey tournaments or Tyler's piano recitals, and I'd make excuses to hang up. She never acknowledged what had happened, never apologized for letting Richard charge me rent while giving her stepson's allowances. Once, she tried. It was February of my senior year, almost a full year since I'd left. "Melissa, I've been thinking a lot about everything. Maybe we were too hard on you." "Maybe?" "Richard was trying to prepare you for the real world." "Mom, he charged me $700 a month. I was 17 years old. Other kids have it worse." That was her defense. Other kids have it worse. As if that justified anything. "I have to go," I said. "Wait, honey. I want you to know that we love you. Richard was asking if maybe you'd want to come to Connor's championship game next month. As a family." The audacity was breathtaking. After everything, Richard wanted me to show up and play happy family for Connor's benefit. "Tell Richard the first can't make it. I'll be working." "You don't have to work anymore. Your father isn't making you." "No, I don't have to. I want to. Because the money I earn is mine, and that's a feeling I really enjoy." I hung up before she could respond. "You're going to do great things," he'd tell me. I always knew it. I applied to 12 colleges. Dad helped me with every application, reading my essays and driving me to campus visits on weekends when I came to stay with him. He'd taken me in during the spring of my junior year, which gave me over a year to adjust before application season hit hard in the fall of senior year. When acceptance letters started arriving, we celebrated each one like it was a lottery win. I ultimately chose State University because they offered the best scholarship package and had a strong business program. The summer before college, I worked full-time at Rosie's, pulling together every dollar I could. Dad contributed what he could, but he wasn't wealthy. He worked as a logistics coordinator for a shipping company, decent money but not enough to fund college outright. We both knew I'd need loans, but we wanted to minimize them. Rosie threw me a going-away party during my last shift. The regulars I'd served for 2 years signed a card and pooled together $300. I sobbed in the back kitchen while Rosie patted my shoulder. "You're gonna do good, kid. Remember what I told you, document everything. Tell your story someday. People need to hear it." College was harder than I expected. Not academically, I managed that fine, but financially. Even with scholarships and Dad's help, there were months I survived on ramen and peanut butter. I worked part-time at the campus library, studied until 2 in the morning most nights, and graduated with $28,000 in student loans. But I graduated. I walked across that stage in my rented gown, and Dad was in the audience crying and cheering louder than anyone else. Mom sent a card with a $50 check. Richard didn't acknowledge it at all. I kept working at Rosie's during summers and breaks, but this time the money went into my savings account. By graduation, I had $4,000 saved. Combined with scholarships and student loans, I got through 4 years at State University for a business degree. My first job out of college paid $38,000 annually. It felt like a fortune. I got a studio apartment, bought actual furniture instead of thrift store finds, and started paying down my loans aggressively. I lived frugally, still haunted by those years of never having enough, of watching every penny disappear into Richard's ledger. Within 3 years, I'd paid off half my loans. I got promoted to account coordinator, then account manager. I switched companies for a better position, then switched again. Each move came with a salary bump, more responsibility, more proof that Richard had been wrong about everything. I started at an entry-level position at a marketing firm, worked my way up to account manager, then jumped to a competitor for a senior position. 8 years out of college, I was pulling in $85,000 a year, had my own apartment, and was genuinely happy. 3 years later, at 33, I got promoted to director level with a salary of $110,000. The raise was substantial, and I celebrated by taking Dad on a vacation to Colorado, something we talked about for years but never done. During those years, I dated occasionally but nothing serious. I developed trust issues, apparently, which my therapist helped me work through. Yes, I saw a therapist. Turns out spending your teenage years being financially exploited by your stepfather while your mother watched does some damage. Who knew? The therapy helped me understand things I'd been too angry to see clearly before. Richard hadn't charged me rent to teach me responsibility. He'd done it because he resented me, resented that his wife came with a child who wasn't his. Making me pay was his way of exercising control, of making me feel like a burden, of ensuring I knew I wasn't really part of his family. Mom had let it happen because challenging Richard meant risking her marriage. She'd chosen security over her daughter. Understanding that didn't make it hurt less, but it helped me stop wondering what I'd done wrong. I hadn't done anything wrong. I just had the misfortune of being a child when the adults around me failed. Mom and I maintained minimal contact. She'd call on my birthday and Christmas. I'd send cards. We never discussed Richard, and I never asked about Connor or Tyler. Dad would occasionally mention running into someone from my old town who'd update him, but I never pressed for details. Through the grapevine, I learned bits and pieces. Connor had gotten married right after college to his high school girlfriend, Brittany. They had a daughter. Tyler had gone to community college, dropped out, and was finding himself through a series of short-term jobs. Richard had retired early from pharmaceutical sales and spent his time golfing and managing his investments. None of it affected me. They were characters in a story I'd stopped reading years ago. I focused on building my life. I took up painting again, something I'd abandoned after that community center art class request got denied. I traveled, taking long weekends to visit cities I'd only read about. I made friends through work, real friends who knew my whole story and still showed up for me. My friend Jessica from the marketing firm became particularly close. She was the first person outside therapy I told everything to, the whole ugly story about Richard and the rent and the favoritism. She listened while we split a bottle of wine on her balcony, and when I finished, she just hugged me. "You know that was abuse, right?" she said. "Financial abuse is real." I'd never thought of it that way. In my mind, abuse meant hitting or screaming or obvious cruelty. But she was right. Richard had systematically exploited me financially while I was a minor, used his position of authority to extract money I couldn't afford to give, and punished me when I fell short. That was abuse. Understanding that reframed everything. I'd spent years thinking maybe I'd been too sensitive, too dramatic, too unwilling to just accept his lessons. But no. What he'd done was wrong, full stop. The clarity was liberating. Jessica became my biggest cheerleader. When I applied for the director position that eventually led to my promotion, she spent hours helping me prepare for the interview. When I got it, she threw me a celebration dinner and made a toast about survivors who thrive. My social circle expanded. I met people through hobbies, through work, through friends of friends. I dated a guy named Marcus for 8 months before we mutually agreed we were better as friends. I had a brief thing with a woman named Diane that taught me some things about myself. I wasn't desperately searching for a relationship, but I was open to connection in a way I hadn't been before. Life was good. Not perfect, but genuinely good. I had stability, security, people who cared about me. The scared 16-year-old who'd fled her mother's house felt like a different person, someone I'd left behind on purpose. Until Karen's phone call, 16 years after I'd walked out Richard's door. After I sent that email to Mom, the silence was deafening. No response, no follow-up calls, nothing. I wondered if she'd even read it or if she'd deleted it in anger. Part of me felt guilty. The bigger part felt nothing but cold satisfaction. 2 weeks later, Dad called with an update. Apparently, Mom had called him crying, asking if he could convince me to reconsider. She told him about Richard's stroke, about Connor and Tyler's inability to help, about her desperation. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her that you're an adult who makes her own decisions, and those decisions have been shaped by how her husband treated you as a child." She didn't like that much. I bet not. She tried to argue that Richard had your best interests at heart. I reminded her about the rent, the penalties, the laptop he confiscated. She got quiet after that. "Do you think I'm being cruel?" I needed to hear his answer. "Mel, do you remember the night you called me? When you said you couldn't do it anymore?" "Of course. You were crying so hard I could barely understand you. You said you felt like you were drowning, like nothing you did was ever good enough. You were 17 years old, pulling straight A's and working yourself to exhaustion, and you felt like a failure because your stepfather had convinced you that you were. I hadn't remembered saying that, but hearing it now brought tears to my eyes. That's cruel, Dad continued. What Richard did to you was cruel. What your mother allowed was cruel. You setting a boundary and protecting yourself? That's not cruelty. That's survival. We talked for another hour. He told me about his day, his coworkers, the book he was reading. Normal dad stuff, the kind of conversation I'd never had with Richard. When we hung up, I felt steadier. The guilt tried to creep back in over the following weeks. I'd catch myself wondering if Richard was comfortable in his facility, if Mom was managing okay, if I should at least offer something small. Then I'd remember the ledger. The penalties. Coming home exhausted from double shifts to find Connor playing video games that cost more than my monthly rent payment. The guilt would evaporate. 3 weeks later, Karen called again. I almost didn't answer. Your mother asked me to let you know they've moved Richard to a more affordable facility. Connor and Tyler have agreed to contribute $200 each monthly. Your mom's taken on extra hours. So they'd figured it out. Just like I'd figured out how to survive on minimum wage while paying Richard $700 a month. Just like I'd figured out how to work and study and pretend everything was fine while falling apart inside. They'd figured it out. Melissa. Karen said she talked to you. What's going on, Mom? She sighed, and I could picture her rubbing her temples the way she used to when Richard and I argued. Richard's had a stroke. Not a major one, but enough that he can't live alone anymore. He's in an assisted living place, and it's expensive. Medicare covers some, but there's a significant monthly gap. What about Connor and Tyler? They're adults now. Silence. Mom? Connor's going through a divorce. He's paying child support and barely making ends meet. Tyler's been between jobs for a while. They can't help. The irony was so perfect I almost laughed again. And you think I should? You're doing well, honey. You always were so responsible. And he is technically your stepfather. No, he was Mom's husband. There's a difference. Melissa, please. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. I'm working full-time, but I can't cover all the bills plus the facility fees. We need $1,700 a month for his care. $1,700. Almost 3 times what Richard had charged me to live in his house. Do Connor and Tyler know you're asking me? I mentioned it might come up. And? Another pause. Connor said it was your choice. Tyler said he didn't think you'd help. Tyler's smarter than I gave him credit for. Melissa. Mom, I paid Richard $600 a month when I was 16 years old. I worked 25 hours a week and gave him every penny while his actual sons got allowances for existing. Do you remember what he said when I left? She didn't answer. He said I'd never make it in the real world because I ran away when things got tough. Well, I made it just fine. And now things are tough for him, and guess who's running away? Connor and Tyler. The golden children who never had to pay rent or work for anything. That's not fair. You're right. It's not fair. None of this has ever been fair. I could hear her crying softly. Part of me felt guilty, but a larger part felt nothing but cold satisfaction. I need to go, I said. Will you at least think about it? I'll think about it. I hung up and stared at my apartment walls. My nice apartment, which I'd furnished myself. Where I paid my own rent. Where no one charged me penalties for being human. I thought about it for exactly 1 day. Then I drafted an email. Mom, I've given your request considerable thought. The answer is no. Richard taught me valuable lessons. About financial responsibility, and I'd hate to deprive Connor and Tyler of similar learning opportunities. They're adults now. Old enough to contribute. Surely they understand what things cost. If Richard's care is truly a priority, they'll figure out how to budget accordingly. As Richard once told me, sometimes life requires tough choices and sacrifices. I'm confident his sons will rise to the occasion the same way he expected me to at 16. If they need guidance on finding employment or managing multiple jobs while maintaining other responsibilities, I'd be happy to share the skills I learned during my character-building teenage years. I'm quite good at balancing priorities now, actually. It's amazing what working 25 hours a week while maintaining a 3.9 GPA will teach you. Please don't contact me about this again. I hope Richard's recovery goes well, and I genuinely hope Connor and Tyler discover the same sense of responsibility Richard was so concerned about teaching me. Love, Melissa. I hit send before I could second guess myself. Mom called 3 times. I didn't answer. She left voicemails ranging from angry to pleading to devastated. I deleted them all. Eventually, she sent me a text message, "Please reconsider. We're desperate." I didn't respond to that either. Dad called that weekend. "Your mom contacted me. She's upset." "I know. You doing okay?" "Honestly? Yeah. I really am." He was quiet for a moment. "Good. You don't owe them anything, Mel. You never did." "I know that now." 3 weeks later, Karen called again. I almost didn't answer. "Your mother asked me to let you know they've moved Richard to a more affordable facility. Connor and Tyler have agreed to contribute $200 each monthly. Your mom's taken on extra hours." "Okay." "She's hurt, Melissa. Really hurt. Karen, I need you to understand something. I was 16 years old, working 2 jobs, paying rent to a man who wasn't my father while watching his actual children get rewarded for nothing. My mother stood by and let it happen. Every single day, she chose him over me. She chose keeping him happy over protecting her daughter. She was in a difficult position. So was I. I was a child. She was the adult." Karen sighed. "For what it's worth, I think you're right. I told your mother years ago that what Richard was doing was wrong. She didn't want to hear it. Thank you for saying that. Are you really never going to help?" I looked around my apartment again. At the art on the walls that I'd bought with my own money. At the bookshelf filled with novels I'd collected. At the life I'd built entirely on my own, despite Richard's prediction that I'd fail. "They'll figure it out," I said. "It's a valuable learning opportunity." 6 months passed. I heard through Dad that Connor had picked up weekend shifts at a warehouse. Tyler had finally landed a stable job in retail management and was contributing more. Mom had sold their timeshare and was considering downsizing their house. Meanwhile, I got promoted to director level. The raise was substantial. I celebrated by taking Dad on a vacation to Colorado, something we talked about for years but never done. On the last night of the trip, sitting on a restaurant patio overlooking the mountains, Dad raised his beer. To my brilliant daughter, who survived and thrived despite everything. We clinked glasses. "You never asked me to pay rent," I said suddenly. "Of course not. You were my kid. Richard used to say I needed to learn responsibility." Richard was an insecure man who resented providing for a child that wasn't biologically his. "That's not your fault, and it was never your burden to fix." Dad set down his beer. "You know what real responsibility looks like? It's you, working your ass off to get through college. It's you, building a career from nothing. It's you, standing up for yourself when everyone expected you to just take it. That's responsibility. Not some manipulative bullshit about paying rent as a teenager." I wiped my eyes. "I'm really glad I called you that night." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." A year after Karen's first call, I got an envelope in the mail from Mom. Inside was a short letter and a newspaper clipping. The clipping was Richard's obituary. The stroke had led to complications. He passed away at 73. The letter was harder to read. "Melissa, I know you won't come to the funeral, and I understand. I need you to know that I realize now what I let happen to you. Richard convinced me that he was helping you, that tough love would make you strong. I was wrong to believe him. I was wrong to choose my marriage over my daughter. I see now what that cost you, and what it cost us. You grew up without me because I failed to protect you when you needed it most. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but it's true. You've become an incredible woman despite everything, not because of it. I'm proud of you, even though I have no right to be. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I finally see clearly. Love, Mom." I put the letter in my desk drawer. I didn't respond immediately. Maybe I would eventually, maybe I wouldn't. The power was mine now. Connor reached out 2 months later via Facebook message. "Hey Melissa. Long time. I wanted to apologize for how things went down back then. I was a kid and didn't understand what was happening, but looking back, it was really messed up. Dad treated you terribly, and Mom should have stopped it. I'm sorry I benefited from that and never said anything. For what it's worth, I get it now. Having my own daughter makes me realize how much you must have been hurting. Anyway, no pressure to respond. Just wanted you to know I see it differently now." I stared at the message for 3 days before typing a response. "Thanks for reaching out, Connor. I appreciate the apology. That takes guts. I hope you're doing better after your divorce and that you're treating your daughter better than we were treated. Take care. Tyler never reached out. I didn't expect him to. Some people never gain perspective. Last month, I bought a house. Nothing huge, just a modest 3-bedroom in a good neighborhood. Dad helped me move in, and we spent the first night eating pizza on the floor and talking about furniture placement. You did it, he said, looking around. Built a whole life from scratch. I had helped. You helped. I just loved you, Mel. That's what parents are supposed to do. I thought about Richard in that moment, about his spreadsheets and lectures about responsibility. About Connor and Tyler getting everything while I got nothing but bills and judgment. About Mom standing silently in that kitchen, choosing comfort over courage. And I thought about myself at 16, terrified and furious and determined not to let them break me. They didn't. I'm 33 now. I have a career I'm proud of, a house I own, and a father who never once made me feel like a burden. I have friends who value me and a life I built on my own terms. Richard wanted to teach me about responsibility. Instead, he taught me about resilience. About knowing my worth. About walking away from people who treat you as less than you are, no matter who they are or what they think they're entitled to from you. So no, I didn't help with the retirement home bills. I didn't go to the funeral. I don't lose sleep over those choices. Because the real lesson Richard taught me was this: you don't owe anything to people who never saw you as worthy of basic dignity and respect. Not your money, not your time, not your emotional labor, and certainly not your forgiveness. I learned that lesson well. Maybe too well for Richard's liking, but that's not my problem anymore. It never was.